All right, welcome back, everyone. We have approached the last segment of our day, and this is going to be a recorded video that we'll be watching. This is on reframing the conversation around equity to bridge the early literacy gap. So this is going to be presented by Neil Debassige, who is an Indigenous education consultant. Neil was awarded the prestigious Meritorious Service Medal by the Governor General for service supporting the Indigenous education, and is now working as a consultant at the Learning Bar. So we're going to watch a recording of Neil, and Neil is going to be available once the recording is over for a brief Q&A session. So we can have...
Ani Bojo, Neil Debassige, Indigenous, Chiging Donjaba, Adikdo Dem, Anishinaabe and Dow. My name is Neil Debassige. I'm from the Chiging First Nation here on Manitoulin Island. And welcome to today's presentation. Before we get started though, I'd like to take a second to acknowledge the traditional and ancestral territory of the First Nation people upon which we are meeting, organizing, and learning today. We pay our respects to members both past and present with honor and gratitude, who have stewarded this land for generations. I am confident that we will work together today in harmony with the best of intentions. It's February and it's wintertime. And for us, the Anishinaabe people of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, winter is a time for telling stories. And we embed our lessons into those stories because our teachings are a way of passing information from one generation to the next. We listen, we interpret, and we digest that information in order to make sense of our world through experience and through language. Now, in those stories, one of the Anishinaabe teachers is a being named Nanabush, or Nanabojo. He's a great teacher, one that teaches his lessons through his adventures and through his misfortunes. A being who has the ability to communicate with nature and transform himself, a shapeshifter of sorts. So much so that when he left, he imparted a message that someday he would return and continue his teachings. And we've patiently waited to the point where we have internalized with anticipation that concept into our greetings. Ani meaning hello, and Bojo meaning, are you Nana Bojo? Have you come back to check in? Could this be you in a different form? For us, our teachings are in our language. And because there are lessons embedded into that language, the lessons of Nana Bojo are no different. In the wintertime is a time for telling stories. Welcome to the Learning Bar's Insight series of discussions and workshops. Like I said, it's a pleasure for me to be here with you guys today, albeit virtually. I would have loved to be there in person. For First Nation people all across Canada, the colonization of First Nation territories brought with it an attempt to stamp out the lessons entrenched in our languages by removing students and disconnecting them from the land and from the language. Now, my aunts and uncles attended those very Indian residential schools, just like the ones we see on television. For us here in Manitoulin Island area, the Spanish River Indian Residential School on the north shore of Manitoulin was one of those schools. And my father was sent to a very similar school, a residential school of sorts, a boarding school, after my grandmother passed away at an early age. But all of those attempts to put out the fire in our young people, to lessen the desire to learn and dim that flame, it lasted a long time, decades. But those attempts failed. And in the 60s and 70s, First Nation educators and leaders took matters into their own hands. And they started to rewrite our history with pieces of policy like the Indian Control of Indian Education policy paper of 1972. It was through this policy, we as First Nation people demanded the right to educate our own children and start undoing the damages caused by the federal system. Now, the red paper, as they called it, paved the way to other documents like the 1988 Traditions and Education paper, which also gave rise to the 1996 RCAP, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and then in 2007, the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People report. That paved way as well for the TRC in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and its series of recommendations as we move forward in the relationships between First Nation people and the Government of Canada and the rest of the population, which helped things like UNDRIP, which is the most recent in 2007, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, become legislated into Canadian law as recent as June 2022 in the form of Bill C-15. Now, Article 14 of UNDRIPA, of the Act itself, states three important things as they pertain to Indigenous peoples. And the first of those is that Indigenous people have the right to establish and control their education systems, providing education in their own languages in a manner appropriate to the cultural methods of teaching and learning. The second part of that is that Indigenous individuals, particularly children, have the right to all levels and forms of education of the state without discrimination. And number 3 of Article 14 states that in conjunction with Indigenous peoples, both on and off reserve, they all have access to an education in their own language and provided in their own culture. That has big implications for us, not only in terms of funding, but in terms of moving our education system forward and reforming our education system as a whole. These tenets laid out in Article 14 are not new to us. We've known them for decades, and they have been the cornerstone and the root of any of the education reform that is happening across many of our First Nation communities in Canada, including my own community of Chiging First Nation. In fact, we were one of the first communities in the country to adopt the Indian control of Indian education policy in the early 80s, and we began laying down the foundation for change. We understood the daunting task of assuming responsibility of a broken system. We knew that there was an uphill battle of underfunding and underachievement, and we also knew that the national graduation rate of 27% was not unlike our own, not to mention the state of our Indigenous language of Anishinaabe was also in crisis and in a state of disrepair. Now, First Nation educators are also aware of the attempt to fix the broken machine of education as a not so easy task, and one that is going to happen and has to happen over time. We needed to adopt a strategy moving forward that would help us understand our past, and one that would allow us to paint a new vision for the future. And thankfully for us, education reform is not a new concept. It's happened globally, and there exists a great body of work that spells out how systems can approach it. And we adopted the work of Dufour and Eaker in what we came to know as paradigm shift, or we also refer it to 641. 6 characteristics of a professional learning community, answering 4 key questions wrapped around one big idea. And that's the one in 641, is the big idea. And it is to change the fundamental purpose of school from a place of teaching to a place of learning. And we decided collectively that we were going to do this as a staff. We were going to shift the emphasis away from teachers and teaching and place it on learners and learning. And one of the ways that we did that was by looking at the research and adopting the balanced school year. So for over a decade, we took the approach that if we were going to infuse language and culture into our education system and into our curriculum, we needed to do that by inspiring people to get outdoors. And we did that by starting the school year a little bit early. We started in August. Now, we understand that the summer and the end of summer is a great time for harvesting medicines, for harvesting crops. There's a great deal to be learned in the stories of outdoor education at that time. If we were looking at rehabbing rivers, that was the time to do it, was in August, as we were planting fish fry into those rivers and creating the bioengineering in the streams necessary to grow those fish into healthy adults. So we chose a different school calendar, one that was not so much based on an agricultural calendar. And we also punctuated breaks within the school year. We saw that there was an increase in student stress and anxiety after about 8 or 9 weeks of school. And so the balanced school year allowed us to take a break, not only for teachers, but for students as well, every 8 or 9 weeks, where we'd have a week off for fall harvest, we'd have the Christmas break, we'd have a March break, and we'd also have a spring break in May. So we took about 5 weeks off in the summer, and then we got an early start. And we saw a significant improvement, not only in our overall energy levels, but also a decrease in not only teacher stress, but student anxiety. And that was one of the ways that we took into account the needs of the learner first. Now, if a system is going to be successful and undergo this paradigm shift of becoming places of teaching and shifting those into places of learning, we need to answer 4 key questions, and every education system needs to be able to do this. The first key question is, are we clear? And we frame them all in that statement, are we clear? So that first key question is, are we clear in what our students need to know and demonstrate in order to meet our First Nation definition of success? We need a curriculum, and it needs to reflect us in that curriculum, not only in language, but in culture and our visions and our goals. The second key question that any system needed to address and answer is, are we clear in how students demonstrate their learning? Essentially, it's an assessment and evaluation question, but we want to know what success looks like when we set out the goals, and students need to know that in order to meet that success as well. The third key question is, are we clear on what our response will be if students don't actually learn what we're trying to impart to their learning? And are we clear when they do learn it? And that's, in essence, a special education question. But it all has to wrap around key question number 4, is, are we clear about what privileging education looks like in our community? Because without a parental involvement, without adult caregiver involvement, that system is going to have a big gap. Now, essentially, the first key question, like I said, is a curriculum question. The second key question is the information around assessment and a clear path to evaluation. The third key question is really a special education question. And the fourth key question is around parental involvement or adult caregiver involvement. Because that empowerment brings such an important component of bringing families into the education equation. Now, this is where our relationship with the Learning Bar really came into play. And back then, Confident Learners wasn't a program. It was a research-based idea that was looking for a partner. And the TLB team were looking for like-minded, willing partners in education to tackle one of the most difficult areas, subject areas, that being literacy, in the curriculum. And we quickly realized that the Learning Bar was a PLC just like us. It was a learning organization, meaning that they had adopted and had in practice those characteristics that are essential for moving systems forward in seeking out the answers to those key questions I mentioned earlier. Now, the first of those 6 characteristics in PLC work, in professional learning community work, was identified by the work of Dufour and Eaker, and it was to establish common mission, vision, values, and goals. And we took this to heart. When I first got back into the role of administration into Lakeview Elementary School, we sat down as a staff and we were going to do a mission and vision statement day. And of course, it was met with some sighs of, oh, geez, and new administrator and new mission. And I made them a deal. I said, okay, if anyone can give me the current mission and vision without looking at any piece of documentation, we will skip this exercise. So I just need one of the 40 or so staff members present today to give me the reason why you're here, the common reason. And we couldn't come up with a unified answer. And so we decided that this work was important. And after a day or so, we managed to scribble down something that everyone could agree on. And the first was this, that the mission of the staff was to create the safest environment possible that nurtures the development of the individual medicine wheels of every learner. And there are some operative words in there: nurture, medicine wheel, safety. And we did that because, you know what, not every day is going to be an easy day, and some days are going to be harder than others. And some days, as staff, we're going to ask, what are we doing here? Pull into the driveway. What is my task today? And if we have that little message in our sun visor, we can pull it down. And my goal today is to create the safest environment for my learners. And I need to nurture that taking care of the medicine wheel of each of those students, the physical quadrant, the emotional quadrant, the spiritual quadrant, and that mental quadrant, and really take that to heart, because we know that those individual medicine wheels interact with each other in the classroom to make up a classroom medicine wheel, and those classroom medicine wheels work together in conjunction to create the medicine wheel of the school. And if those wheels are out of time, we're out of sync as a group. And so the staff really liked that. And they figured that if they did that every day, that 5 years or 10 years down the road, we could achieve our vision. We could achieve the goal of the school, which was to become the premier elementary school in the province. That means number one, not compared to First Nations, compared to everyone. And they were confident in that. They really liked the way that feel, and it was a unification process that helped bring us together as a staff. Now that was finished, we took upon, well, let's look at the values. And this one was easier because it really boils down to 7 values when it comes to us as Anishinaabe people. And they're really human values as far as I'm concerned. But things like the 7 grandfather teachings. You've got love, you've got respect, you've got bravery, truth and honesty, you've got wisdom, and you've got humility. And we agreed that it was going to be our goal to really put everything in those contexts. And that became the answer to, that first characteristic of a professional learning community. Now, coming together, with the common mission, vision, values, and goals was actually a start to that second characteristic for us. That second characteristic of a PLC, which is to form collaborative groups as often as possible, to deconstruct the historical classroom silo, if you will, and figure out how to create a team or a group of teams to come together to dialogue and discuss, to have discourse, that two-way street of communication within the staff that focuses those discussions on student-by-student progress and skill-by-skill development. student by student, skill by skill. When I, as an administrator, am listening to conversations that are being had within divisions and within staff, between staff members, I'm looking for that and I'm listening for that, because it's a good indicator that we're starting to focus ourselves along a very specific path of data. Now, we use divisional teams to form divisional goals, and for the primary division, our goal was that all students need to be able to read at grade 3 by the end of grade 3. Now, we were aiming for a provincial standard of level 3 in that goal, but we knew that the meta research showed that 89%, so this is a big one for me, probably one of the biggest, 89% of students who can read at grade 3 by the end of grade 3 go on to graduate on time. Because graduation rate was one of the things that our chief and council tasked the education department with, was making sure that we improved our graduation rate. How do we do that? And the research shows us how to do that. Get them focused on being able to read at grade 3 by the end of grade 3. Now, collaborative groups, we also did teacher study groups. Every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month, we conducted teacher study groups where we talked about current trends, hot topics. Teachers presented things that were of interest to them. And we also incorporated every second Wednesday a language class in Anishinaabe. And that was a big deal as we were trying to learn and invigorate the learning of the language. And then the third Wednesday, we had professional learning community time where we really focused on our divisional goals, and we had that professional discourse in relation to student by student and skill by skill. And really those discussions and that discourse is number 3 in the PLC process. It's collective inquiry, that together we challenge the status quo, that just because, this has been the way it has been for decades doesn't mean it's the way it has to be, for the next 10 years. And that teacher efficacy is a real thing, that they can and have made a difference in student lives. And the way to continue to have an impact on student achievement is through changing classroom practice and evolving together pedagogically as a one unit. Now, implementing change requires action, and the fourth characteristic of PLC is actually that, making sure that you're action oriented. Learning requires action, and by seeking out new methods of teaching literacy, it requires us to adopt new pedagogical approaches. And it involves the learning, the science of learning, the science behind the process. To know that each step along that staircase of reading for students has look-fors in student understanding, and that when missed could cause gaps in understanding that come back and cause issues later. That we as educators have to actively seek out the answers to our own questions in that regard, and we have to take action. When a student misses, and I saw this so many times as an administrator, that kindergarten to grade 3, we didn't really have a whole lot of behavior issues. But as students moved into the junior and intermediate grades, we started to see students acting out. And a lot of times, it was a cover-up. It was a cover-up for things they couldn't do in the classroom in regards to literacy. They knew that they struggled. The rest of the class knows that they struggled because they're peers. They see them every day. And they compensate, they distract, they get into trouble so that they get kicked out of classroom, reading time or learning time for that very reason. And so by looking at and knowing the step-by-step process, the skill-by-skill process for students in regards to literacy at an early age, our teachers found that they could prevent those things from happening later on in the junior division. They had an idea of what quality looked like in the classroom and what they were aiming for. And that brings us to characteristic number 5 in a PLC is, CQI, continuous quality improvement. When just when we think we have it figured out what quality looks like and sounds like and feels like when it comes to literacy, for our learners, we have to redefine and improve it. We have to improve that quality and develop new plans. Once we get there and we're successful in our goal of having 80% of our kids at level 3 or level 4, we revamp that plan to address, the next 10%. And we do that in using SMART goals, if you will. And I think having that constant reevaluation in a cycle of our pursuit for quality is a way to really help. It really helped us as a professional learning community. And in setting those targets, we set targets that were achievable, and we were using quantifiable measures. And this was the sixth characteristic. We became results oriented, and we have to be that. We have to understand that data is our friend. I mean, it really is one of the goals that we're trying to work on and help students achieve at higher rates. And that data, the information that allows us to gather data, we can use that to make informed decisions moving forward in a timely manner. And that's the quantifiable part, the quantitative data, but there's also qualitative data. How does it feel when we walk into a school? How does it feel when we walk into a classroom? If culture and language is important, how do I know that that's happening? If I walk into a classroom, if I close my eyes, do I hear students responding in the language? Do I hear conversations between teachers and EAs around student by student and skill by skill? And is it discourse? And I think that quality and quantity of information when it comes to quantitative and qualitative are important pieces in the results-driven component to professional learning communities. And for us, this is what the Confident Learner program allowed us to do. And when we coupled that with the early years evaluation in our kindergarten program, it really meshed well together. It allowed teachers and educators to work together in the assessment process, where they learned in real time, the student placement on their individual literacy pathway, and importantly informed their daily instructional practice. It allowed our teachers to challenge their teaching practice and reevaluate their own successes along with that of their students, and revisit areas of concern before they moved on. You have to remember that all of the curriculum prior to grade 4, almost globally, is about learning to read. And after that, grade 4 on, you have to be able to read in order to learn. And so we need to have conversation about the importance of making sure that the foundation for literacy is laid out in the primary division. And that's what the early years evaluation allowed us to do with our kindergarten teachers and looking for milestones, but also in the practical application of the science of reading and the science of assessment. It allowed our teachers to really dive deep into those concepts. The newest version of the CL program has taken up answering questions not only 1 and 2, like I just mentioned, but also questions 3 and 4 as well. The improved version provides teachers and administrators with capacity development and professional development along the way through the online course content, like I said, about the science of reading and the science of assessment. It gives educators the background knowledge that unfortunately we just don't get in Teachers College in terms of literacy instruction, not to the depth that we need to in order to ensure students achieve. The Confident Learner program has built into it not only professional development to put things into context and develop overall teacher knowledge, but as the program is being implemented, there are weekly check-ins with TLB assigned literacy coaches, coupled, and that's for teachers to talk with your literacy resource lead in your school to really dive into the data that's being accrued and have meaningful discussions about student progress and about difficulties that may be encountered with particular staff members or confusion around concepts. But having that regular teacher check-in with an LRT is great, as is the weekly or bi-weekly coaching sessions for administrators. And in terms of leadership and leading, being an instructional lead in the classroom, using our resources like Care and Power and leading with intention, just in line with creating collaborative, data focused teams. It's invaluable to an administrator. And as a former education director for my First Nation, it was always troubling when we looked at budgets. For me to read, statistics that said that 80% of professional development that happens off-site in schools stays off-site. And when that's happening and we're spending $50,000 or $60,000 a year for school-wide PD, that means that $40,000 or $50,000 of that is not being, used effectively, and that could be used elsewhere if that's the case. And so having those dedicated TLB experts chime in when we need to and help the staff in their literacy teaching, but also their evaluation practices is just an added bonus. Was an added bonus to me as an administrator. It hit all of my check marks. It hit the fact that we needed to develop capacity, and we made it possible for that to happen within the school day with our teacher study groups, because that happened on Wednesdays during the school day. It was in-house, it was practical, it's user-friendly. The para assessments gives real-time data to track students and change practice, inform practice and change it when required. And when we look at the macro, it was cost effective, right? To have full school PD along a unified direction in a very important area that we've decided to be one of our non-negotiable goals. It really was cost effective. And so, it started to bring us to that fourth key question that we're trying to find ways to answer. And it's one of the difficult ones, because the first three are within our control within the school. Now, how a community privileges education is a reflection of the relationship that exists between home and school, between school and community, between parent and teacher, and between student and parent. And so it's not something that we have the direct control over, because there are so many moving parts in that relationship development. But we have to be clear on how the community privileges that. And consider this. If a student attends school from kindergarten to grade 12, so for all of their schooling, from 0 to 18, and they were to spend all of their days at school that they're required to spend there at perfect attendance, they never miss a day for anything. When we add all of that up, it only accounts for 9% of their time. 9%. So that means that over 90% is spent elsewhere. It's spent with siblings. It's spent with grandparents. It's spent in the community. It's spent going to ceremony. It's spent not at school. And so that can be even further analyzed. And if we look at students' time on task at school, some of the studies out there show it's 20%. So if we're dealing with they're there only 9% of the time, but even when they're only focused for a third of their time, right? We really don't have much to deal with. And so that means we have to buy time elsewhere, both at the front end, before we get them 0 to 6, and when we do have them, but they're not in school, in the evening. And most likely they're with an adult caregiver. Now, in many of our cases in First Nation territory, it's extended family. It's just the reality of our situation: aunts, uncles, grandparents, who are the primary caregivers. And we have to remember they, either directly or indirectly, may still be reeling from, the effects of the intergenerational effects and trauma of residential schools. And so we have to understand that. And just like you guys, I've dealt with many parents who are not confident in their skill sets or their levels of education. Maybe they're embarrassed, and maybe they can't read themselves, and they're truly wanting to help their children, and their literacy progress and development, but they don't know how. And I remember this as a teacher, and how it was a struggle for me, because I was an intermediate teacher and a math and science teacher at that. So, literacy was something they needed to have when I got them. And when I had parents come to me, I didn't know how to empower them to help their children when their children couldn't read. And, that was troubling. And I think, as I can see now, and I can see it in teachers, as we adopted the Confident Learner program and the early years evaluation, that our educators, as that knowledge base grows, our understanding grew of what we were looking for, and what we were looking for in literacy development. And as they climbed the literacy mountain in front of them, we were able to share openly, what's needed in the foundation for literacy to parents. And it gave rise to initiatives like our Take 15 program, where we met with the parents of our 3-year-olds before we got them in JK. And we provided them with, a plethora of books and word games in a backpack that they, got to take home. And we talked to them about what to do and how they could contribute by just taking 15 minutes out of their day prior to JK, because we were stealing time, right? We knew it was a little bit of a trick, because we knew that 15 minutes with their kids snuggled up with a book would buy us 20, would buy us a half an hour, maybe even an hour in some cases. And they would do that regularly, and that's buying months of instruction and milestone development, before they get to junior kindergarten, which would continue on in the primary division, only enhancing those literacy skills further. And so, it made such a big difference in the relationship between home and school. We started to see parents more, not only at our information nights and the welcome back barbecues, but because they felt like they could talk to teachers more, and they had more of a role in their child's education. The relationship got stronger, and it helped new relationships between home and school, and in the early years that, like I said, carried on into the junior and intermediate divisions. And it really truly helped to deconstruct the colonial brick wall, brick by brick. And we did that together. We did that by practicing those 6 characteristics of a professional learning community. We brought in an outside organization like the Learning Bar and the Program of Confident Learners, using the early years evaluation to give us insight into our starting points. We collaborated collectively. We challenged the status quo, and we used data to continuously strive to improve the quality of education for our First Nation learners. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. I'm going to be on a live question and answer period right after this. Again, it has been my pleasure, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Nahau, miigwech.
Honey, bonjour. Pleasure to be here.
Anil, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys.
Perfect. Thank you for a great and awesome presentation. That was amazing.
You're welcome.
So we can open the floor for some questions. Any questions, guys? They're all awed by you, I think.
Well, I just rushed back from. I was coaching volleyball. I coached the senior volleyball team at our local high school, and I just rushed back. I just sitting down at my desk here, and we lost our finals in a fifth game heartbreak. Oh, it was just such a good game though, folks. It was so exciting, and just a little bit sad to see some of our senior girls not win. Mind you, they played the best game that I've ever seen them play, so they could hold their heads high today. But that was an exciting day for sure. But yeah, I'd be willing to take any questions if you had any in terms of anything you may have heard here in terms of the PLC piece. I know the balanced school year is a little bit different. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that was something that worked particularly well for us. And obviously the whole piece around the capacity development of the Confident Learner program is just is so important at the elementary panel. If there are any questions, I can try and field them.
Hi, thanks for spending time with us. I have a question about the longevity of the work that you've done. So as your students have progressed through school and into their futures, what have you seen in their futures? Where have they gone? What have they done? What sort of supports have you seen as they've gone out into life?
Sure. So we've had this is a story I love telling. It has to do with robotics. So I'm not sure if you guys have robotics programs out there, but here, this first Lego League, like they put on these crazy competitions, and it's a year-long endeavor. And a group of our students in the junior division, they were in grade 5. They decided. And these were the direct benefactors of the CL. So they went through the program when our teachers had it figured out, and now they had moved into the junior division. And the way these robotics tournaments work is you do all of your coaching ahead of time, and then the kids are on their own. They get locked into these rooms with these incredibly difficult problems to solve, and they just have to figure it out. And it's all based in language. And this group of 5 little Ojibwe girls, like they were just so awe-inspiring, and we didn't know how they did until the end. And so there were 15 teams. All of these teams had been there, for 15 years running and this is their first time. And so they're laying out all the awards, and they're going through the top 5 and the honorable mentions and the whatever. And there's really only 2 spots going to the provincials, and it pretty much counted our kids out. You know what I mean? It's their first time. We didn't know how they did, and then they announced that Lakeview School was one of the final 2, and the place erupted. It was just, to me as an administrator and as a parent, and knowing how that type of problem solving competition worked. I know 100% that it was because of the impact of the Confident Learner program, right? And its ability to instill a deciphering of language to the point where they could use that to solve complex problems. That's one of the you know, that was an immediate one within the division. But we've also had we recently had a graduate from Lakeview School go on to be the valedictorian of Manitoulin Secondary School. So it's an island-wide secondary school with you know 7 feeder schools, a number of them First Nation, and we've never had in the history of Chiging, we've never had a First Nation, let alone not only a First Nation valedictorian, but one from Lakeview School. And last year or 2 years ago, we had a graduate of our program who was another direct recipient of you know the Confident Learner program go on to be that valedictorian and you know is in doing human behavior and psychology at McMaster currently. So you know those are it's just the tip of the iceberg. We know how amazing our learners can be, and you know that was a couple of pieces of evidence as proof of that.
Thank you, Neil. Any other questions?
So Neil, there's no other Neil Debassigues in Canada. This I know. And in your work as a leadership coach with these several schools in Manitoba, as a leadership coach, what do you think is the most critical piece that you and Karen bring to it?
So that's a good question, Doug. This is the you know Confident Learner 2.0 version with this big capacity development piece. Like I had mentioned earlier, our teachers don't get enough of that in terms of Teachers College, and you know in working out west, what we're seeing is you know that it's no different than here in Ontario, that we need to have a longer and more intense training in literacy for our primary division teachers, that primary qualification. And so that's one of the things. And that, you know, having the LRT direct conversations and coaching with the literacy lead at the school is you know, so beneficial. But then from the administrator point of view, you know, we're tasked with so many things, and we're putting out so many fires on any given day that our time is stretched so thin. And one of the things that I found I didn't do and spend a whole lot of time on was actually leading instruction and being the principal teacher of the school. Right. I was just so taken away by all of these other burning questions and burning issues that I wasn't effectively leading as I had wanted to be. And I think that part of the coaching piece now is incredibly valuable to our administrators, because it's having those conversations, and I'm sure you've heard this phrase. I use it often, but I think it's one of Doug's favorite. Is in terms of student by student and skill by skill. What are the conversations that you hear? I mean, I'm a little bit sneaky, you know, when I'm doing my walkarounds. I stand outside the hallway first and listen into the conversations that the students are having with their teachers, or teachers are having with their TAs, and I'm looking for that. And I definitely know that our administrators out in Frontier are having more of those conversations around student by student and skill by skill development, and having administrators benefit from instructional leadership coaching is a big one. And then the other piece is attendance. COVID is a big thing. We're still reeling from the impacts of that, and especially in some of our northern communities where attendance is an issue, And we all know that if there's one thing that is going to be an indicator of success, it's going to be attendance. So, you know, giving students the opportunity to make full use of the time they do spend at school through this type of program has been is beneficial, even if we're getting them for 2 or 3 days a week. I think there was one question in the back.
No, I think you need.
You mentioned at the beginning that you have a goal of being the best school. You know, not just among Indigenous populations or Ontario or whatever. And I'm assuming I can ask this question since you work for the Learning Bar, but I'm just wondering if you have data to support, whether that's PISA, whether that's whatever, to support. I'm just very, personally, I'm just very passionate about the outdoor learning and the learning on the land and how much that can be done. And I guess I'm just curious, between that and your use of the balanced school year, if you have some data to support the impact on student learning.
So yeah, and that's a great question. You know, we use a standards-based test here that's conducted by the province in terms of it's the EQAO, so the Education Quality and Accountability Office. So that was one of our key data pieces. Now, prior to CL, we were using everything. We were using DRAs, we were using CAP4, we were using everything to try and grab some data. And as we were being a part of the production team and the development team of the Confident Learner Assessment, we really put a lot of pressure on our teachers to do it all. And then once we realized that that end of grade 3 marker for us, when our students were performing at grade 3, the snapshot of the EQAO data, right, which is we stopped doing the CAP4, we stopped doing the DRA, and we used that because we knew where our students were. We knew that if they were in that phase 3 of the program and nearing, you know, it used to be a 20-step program, nearing those last few steps and really hammering out the fluency component to that they were going to perform well. And the data supported that from the EQAO. We did adopt, so we always continued to use that as a data point for us and track that longitudinally. And we found that that piece of data, in terms of the First Nation piece of our chiefs, when I presented this at the AFN, the Assembly of First Nations, I said, you know, to the chiefs, if you could have one question, what would it be to educators? And they're like, how do we get our students to graduate on time? How do we improve the graduation rate? And not even so much concerned with the performance of grades. They're just like, it's taken us too long if we even get our students there. And when we compared where they were, our students that were high performing in CL, and they were also high performing in level 3 or 4. Level 3 is the provincial standard in EQAO. That those students within a marker of 5% graduated in their 4-year time frame. And that to me, you know, answered so many questions, not only from our political leadership, and but also was a huge force of backup when it came to convincing our teachers that this is going to be worthwhile. So it actually caused us to assess less in terms of the numbers of these standardized or standard-based types of tests, and really hammer out the where are we right now, right? And what can we do tomorrow to change that? And that to me is everything as a teacher, right? Not like an EQAO and you get the response back in October and it's like, okay, well, those guys are in grade 4. They're, you know, in grade 7. What are we going to do? We don't respond, and we don't mine the data, right, like we do with this. And that was the big one for us is you know, reading at grade 3 by the end of grade 3, and our EQAO bolstered that and supported that piece. I hope that at least partially answers that question.
Thank you, Neil.